Hello and welcome to the Cuyamungue Institute, our Q&A conversation for exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, and on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we do want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamungue Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist, Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of that deeper human connection to all of life. It's part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So as an educational institution, we do take an open approach, and we're inviting scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. These weekly discussions have included, neuroscience and anthropology, archaeoastronomy, ecology, philosophy, shamanism, hero's journey, much, much more, from the arts to the sciences. And you're invited to visit our website at CuyamungueInstitute.com. We have hundreds of videos of these types of presentations and webcasts available to you. And as a nonprofit, of course, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamungue Institute. Today, let's talk about spirits. The concept and phenomena, the concept and phenomena of spirits goes back to the very origins of humankind. Every civilization, religion, culture throughout history indicates a relationship and contact between the spirit world and our own. And as we pull back that veil, we discover that this relationship with the world of spirits has been a huge, impactful influence on the human story. And in fact, it's directly affected the entire world history. So this is at the core of the mission of this institute. We want to further explore this capacity of the human experience and how this positive engagement of these experiences can impact us.
Well, indeed, Paul, the founder of this institute would argue that call it what you may, and there have been many names given it over the long course of human history. Intellectualize it as you wish, and certainly there's an equal number of attempts to explain it. Deny it, hide from it to your detriment. But there is a phenomenon, not quite as unseen or unfelt as we may pretend in our modern scientific era. It's one the ancients, our ancestors, knew well and successfully engaged for their betterment. Felicitas Goodman referred to it as those early societies did in the simplest catch-all term, spirit, and handed us one of the universal access codes, a set of rules of engagement among the many to open this bandwidth, put our finger in the socket of the universal life force, and flourish. And it's through this practice and mutual research that we met Christine VanPool and her husband, Todd. Now advisors to this institute, we've enjoyed many conversations with them on the key questions, the full spectrum of what this phenomenon is and how early societies engaged it, the various protocols, definitions, understandings, cosmologies, and how this phenomenon shows up in our lives today. Whether we understand it or not, acknowledge it or not, it seems to want to engage us in some capacity, making itself known as the opportunity presents, often in our greatest hours of need and therefore openness. And certainly we've all had those moments when we seem to be touching the hem of something larger, far larger than ourselves. And it's truly an illuminating conversation to have with one another. Yeah. And it's surprising, though perhaps it shouldn't be, that when we create safe spaces for this sharing, it's surprising how much we all have to say about it, about the workings of this in our lives. It's particularly rewarding to me how many science types and academics we find, past and present, who acknowledge this, a few openly, most privately.
Mhm.
The VanPools are of that rare breed, like Felicitas Goodman, the founder of this institute, that do so quite openly and with a lot of research to back it up. And that's the story contained in their new book, An Anthropological Study of Spirits, of this engagement with whatever it is, so vast and so varied, hard to contain entirely with mere words. For this is nothing new. This is something that, taken as a matter of fact, of long-standing covenant between the realms among the many cultures, long under the lens of anthropology. They knew it. Anthropology, the study of us, well, it should well include this.
Okay.
Let's welcome Christine and Todd VanPool. They join us from Columbia, Missouri, where they both are professors of anthropology at the University of Missouri. Welcome, team. Good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm just going to say something really quick. We're in a major thunderstorm. So if we get knocked off Zoom, we'll get back on as soon as we can too. You will probably hear thunder speaking to you, most societies worldwide, and especially before Western Cartesian thinking, the scientific thinking. A lot of people really did think thunder was a voice of a deity, a god, or a spirit. So it is speaking today behind us, but yes.
Fabulous.
So thank you again.
We've had a
Both of
spirit
you.
visit today here, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone else, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is your quest? How did you begin? I mean, you have a personal story.
And as a
of
husband and
this.
wife team, I mean, being
Yeah.
able to work together, that's a challenge.
It's not.
Well,
Just,
our quest, it's interesting that you mentioned Felicitas Goodman with her research. I actually found Cuyamungue because I found Felicitas Goodman. I'd read several books, and then as I was writing the chapter that dealt with Felicitas Goodman, this is a long journey. So we're talking about 2017. We started really diving into this book and writing it. But as I'm writing about Felicitas, trying to learn about who she was as a person, as a researcher, I found Cuyamungue. And then like 2 years later, I told Todd, I want to go to a workshop in Santa Fe to learn what Felicitas Goodman did. And then I found you guys. So it's been a fun journey. I started because, well, I think all my life I had perceptions and things going on with me that could be called either I'm crazy or I'm having spirits. And it took me a long time to embrace the idea that I'm not crazy and that it's okay to have perceptions and understanding. And for me, this book is kind of my foot forward saying it's okay that we as scientists can start studying the world of spirit, and it's going to be okay. And that there's a lot of cultural information cross-culturally from hundreds of thousands of groups worldwide that believe in spirits, they have perceptions, are able to engage with them. And it's okay. So this is just a first draft of our bigger research questions.
it's interesting how this has been with us from time immemorial, and yet science today wants to rather deny it, but it keeps showing up, right? It's undeniable in so many aspects. Call it what you may. Todd.
Well, I'm just building on both what you were saying and what Christine was saying. It's the belief in spirits and the role of spirits in human society is profound cross-culturally, but even within our own culture. So you look at the most recent studies by, say, Gallup or other opinion polls, you'll find the majority of individuals, majority of Americans continue to believe in supernatural, the survival of the soul after death, these sorts of principles. Even societies like they say the Soviet Union or Maoist China, where the belief in spirits and religion was directly persecuted and was attempted to be removed, it continued to be present. Every culture has the concept of the soul, not necessarily that everybody in each culture believes in the soul, but every culture has a concept of a soul that survives into the afterlife. Every culture has the concept of deities and some form of what we would call supernatural systems. Now, supernatural is a term that sometimes applies to some cultures. In other cultures, they may not make the sort of distinction we make between the natural and the supernatural. There's a researcher by the name of Hollowell who made this point in 1960, and he observed that for many cultures, the natural and supernatural don't break down cleanly, in the sense of what we might call the supernatural spirits and whatnot are embedded in, and everything is imbued within a spiritual framework, such that you can't really distinguish between the secular and the religious, or the spirit and the physical. Some cultures you can, some cultures you can't, but every culture has the idea that there's something that goes beyond just
Because we experience it.
material.
Right?
Yeah.
We experience it. That's why this thing won't go away. And it's interesting to me how in our culture it still shows up and is embraced. But look at the sci-fi films that embrace this and how popular they are. And they have chapter after chapter, these franchises, Star Wars with the Jedi and Avatar with their own planetary Gaia concept. We embrace that. Look at these are the most successful films of our age. Why? Because they're telling us a truth that we can't say in polite society, right? We can still embrace these in a mythic way.
It is interesting that even amongst atheists, there is still belief in supernatural and spirituality, even for individuals who otherwise claim to not believe in a deity or the supernatural. It is interesting that all of us have the potential of experiencing the divine in some way. If we're hungry enough, if we take the right sorts of plant medicines, if we are in the right circumstance, physiologically, our structures are
spontaneously.
Absolutely. And Felicitas Goodman, the founder of your institute, demonstrated this. For typical people, most individuals put in the right circumstance will experience something, a divine experience. And that's what you all,
we
of
all
course,
have it hardwired within.
Absolutely. And that's true regardless of your ethnicity or your ancestry or even your culture. In the right circumstance, we'll all have some form of experience.
He believed, and I do, that this is our natural state. And it's just a matter of taking off these temporary blinders to experience directly.
Well, it's actually more recent history that that division was made. I mean, it seems as you look back through history, looking at the indigenous world and of experiences, there's no separation between this physical reality and this alternate reality. It blends together as one reality,
Two sides of
as
same
the
coin.
normal full range of experience of the human capacity. It's not limited to just this physical world as the only experience you can have, and that it's equally as valid to have that foot in the other world and bring that knowledge in as well.
Absolutely. One of the ones I like is from certain groups in the plains in the southeastern woodlands believe that spirit has weight. Spirit has weight, is physical, and is part here in the world. So things that we see as physical is as much spiritual, which means that intertwining that is so present amongst so many people worldwide.
An example of this that we found, that we talk about in the book, but that is well known. We're not the first people to observe this, but there's a real distinction between kind of a Western perspective, and it's not just the West that has this perspective, but the idea of a haunted house where you've got inert matter and there's something that is continuing to be in the haunted house. It's moving around or doing whatever. And then other cultures where objects themselves have the spirit. So, for example, the Dene
has the spirit.
Yeah, the Dene, the Navajo, the Dene there in the Southwest, as part of their blessing way ceremonial complex, they'll actually bring houses to life. And there are these very beautiful ritual structures that they'll use where they take an area, they create the cornerstone, they build the hogan there, and the hogan becomes animated. It becomes a partner with the humans that live there, and the hogan will protect the humans as the humans have certain responsibilities to the hogan. So a well-maintained hogan will help the family unity, help maintain safety and happiness and prosperity. And by the same token, a poorly maintained hogan will become the site of discord and will not be able to fulfill the role that will create a stronger
optimize the life of its inhabitants. It's
Exactly.
interesting how even Marie Kondo, if you talk about tidying an organization, hers is the most popular among the many offerings. Why? Because she takes that animist, she's Japanese, she takes that animist point of view. Hey, if I'm going to discard something, let me thank it and bless its spirit. And then,
Release.
Yeah. So we know this stuff. We know this, right?
Absolutely.
It's some deep, deep level. So I want to say that you're of a rare breed. Felicitas Goodman was anthropologist. You Victor and Edith Turner.
Turner, which-
I mean, we can almost count on our hands those academics who've openly acknowledged and tried to say, even though in the West we tend to mythologize this, oh, let's study you ancient cultures and we'll pat you on the back and say how nice for your myths, but it's just all a figment of your imagination, right? It's a rare breed who will say, like you are, hey, this stuff is what? How do you define it yourselves? What is
So-
your mission with your book and your work?
One of the things that we've done is we've in both the book and our own research, we've moved away from questions of what is real or not, in the sense of, is this account, whatever it might be, real? And we've instead asked about its cultural importance and the framework that people are approaching it. So, for example, there in the Southwest, there are, of course, the Pueblo and Kachina. It seems to us to be a misguided effort to try to prove the objective reality of the Kachina, because you have the Kachina masks, you have the men who put on the masks and literally become the Kachina. So this is not a situation where they're just pretending to be something like a Halloween costume or something like that. That's not what's going on here. So are the Kachina real? Absolutely. You can literally see them. But then, of course, comes the question of, well, are the Kachina living in some place where half the year away from humans and so on and so forth? That becomes with respect
question.
to people who ask these sorts of questions, that's not the sort of question that's going to lead to particularly good insights regarding the Kachina. So we've attempted to move away from questions that have focused on, is this a real story?
Sure.
To asking that same question in a different way, which is, the reality of the story is present. People do things and they interact with spirits, whether the spirits are something in the head, whether the spirits are something that's out there somewhere, where the spirits are some other reality. People have suggested each of these three possibilities, but for sure we know that people interact with spirits. So we just simply took that as a given. People do have spiritual interactions,
and they're real. Those interactions are what we call ontologically real, meaning they come from a base where people that believe in it is going to acknowledge it and treat it as real. And so we don't ask the question, is it real? Rather, we know that people have their own beliefs, and we respectfully engage with those beliefs and their reality to study the experience and study what we can learn about spirits through others' reporting of the real spirits in their own world and life.
Well,
I
there is
can
a
see-
power to belief. I mean, there's a
Yes,
power
the
to
power to
just the
believe.
acknowledgement and being focused on it, that it brings it in. It does bring in healing. It does bring in some
Absolutely.
satisfaction of
Many
connection.
mechanisms within
It
that.
kicks in
that
the
engage
entire
that.
physiological thing, which, yeah.
And I appreciate how you were led to Goodman and resonate with Goodman, because she would say, you don't need to believe this. If you do the practice, this door is opened, your engagement happens. You can intellectualize it any way you want, because it's based on our back to the physical world. It's based on our own physiology.
Right.
We have the
Embodied.
capacity within that can be activated to
Right.
engage this.
Mhm.
And we have many people who feel, hey, it's all just happening between my ears, and other people say, hey, it's the cosmos at large.
I remember having to
Everywhere.
digest that topic when she first talked to
Yeah.
us about the idea that it's a physiologically based practice. You know,
No
what
belief system
There's not a belief
required.
system. It's based
Yeah.
on the physiology. Say, wait a minute, what is that? What is that all about? And of course, nowadays we use the term embodied spirituality a lot. You hear that term thrown around a lot. And I think that's what she was talking about. She was talking about that it comes from within our own physiology.
Let that experience
Right.
teach you what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
well, tell me how you outlined this and how you looked at the whole
Okay.
world's history of protocols and rules of engagement and covenants between this realm and that.
And if you scan your book, I mean, it's broad. We're not, you know, we spent a lot of time from our side wanting to represent Dr. Goodman, but your research is broad and inclusive.
Well, would this be okay for us to just pull up a couple of quick slides?
Yes.
So we
Let's
can
do that.
stay on top? We don't have to do it, but I
No,
personally
let's see your slideshow.
PowerPoints so that I remember what I'm trying to say and I know what we're doing. I don't like a lot of text on my slides, so forgive me. This is a little more than I normally do. This is the day Todd and I got the book into Swallow Hall, our office. We were pretty excited. It's been a long journey. We started in 2014 with conversations with our young son who was asking questions after watching some, thank you, Todd, some paranormal shows. And as we were engaging with our young sons, then asking great questions. Yeah, Roy asked me straight up one time, Mom, why would the house, not a ghost, but why would the house want to hurt somebody? I'm like, okay, well, let me explain that a lot of people worldwide believe that a house is a living being, and you should be respectful of your house. You should take care of your house. Your house is your, if you will, your protector from the storm that rages outside. I mean, I really do thank my house sometimes on the way out the door. Thank you, house, for taking care of us, providing us safety and shelter, both from the physical world, but also the spirit world that intertwines. But anyway, so we started that book with these great conversation from our own children, and the science and the mysticism back and forth across these continuums we went. But it followed out of my own dissertation research, where I looked at Casas Grandes smoker effigies that had these curious things. We call an American sign pound sign, although we confuse people from London, sorry. We call these pound signs in America. It's not like money. These are hashtags, tic-tac-toe boards. But what's on a suite of these people that I thought were shamans, that shamans interact with spirit beings. And I wish I had a better picture here, but they have tutelary spirits. The spirits guide them, but that's how my discussion with the boy started, was through the own lens of learning a lot about shamans over the last, I hate to say it, 25 years. So why is our book different? When you asked about the goal of the book, the mission, well, we are different because we were seeking to say, we're going to start with the assumption spirits are real. We're not going to play whether they are not real, but we're going to turn it upside down and assume they are real. And this presents us this worldview. Todd.
So one of the things that anthropologists do, and we're really good at it, is we look at how cultural variation is impacting different people and the use of different aspects of culture. And so we can talk about the subsistence system and how that's working throughout the culture and how that impacts people's lives. We have a tendency to do the same thing with spirits. And we ask, what is it the spirits do for humans? How do humans use spirits? What are the social roles for spirits? These sorts of things. That's great, and we've generated a lot of good information about it. What we want to do with our book, though, was flip that upside down and take it from the spirit's perspective. So, as Chris was saying, we weren't asking questions about, are spirits real or not? We know that people behave in certain ways because of the spirits. What we wanted to do was actually say the spirits as opposed to the humans.
Right.
And when I say that, obviously we're studying the humans because that's our focus here. But the spirits frequently want things from humans. So the spirits have their own motives, they have their own desires. Oftentimes, especially with, for example, ancestors who may require a lot from humans, the humans would just as soon not have to worry about the spirits, but they have these obligations to the spirits that require a lot of effort, they require a lot of work. And so we thought, we like the humans and we understand how humans can use spirits. In this particular case, though, we wanted to look at the spirits and how the spirits use humans to accomplish the spirits' task. And so we wanted to flip the world upside down and look at the world a little bit from the spirit perspective, because that's what we thought was missing from a lot of the anthropological work we were looking at. And our colleagues do some really great work, so we want to acknowledge their excellent work. But that's what's different about our book. We're taking the spirit's eye view of the situation.
So we've already covered some of this already, but yeah, so we thought unhelpful anthropological questions, but something that we have in anthropology, a lot of inks built on these questions, and a lot of people being pretty negative to any anthropologist. Well, unfortunately, the Turners were sometimes really challenged and were told they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, which for us was really disheartening. But people do ask, are spirits real? Well, they're not real, so you can't study them. And that's been a major motif in anthropology, unfortunately, a major theme. And then another major theme we see within evolutionary psychology, within anthropology, are people believe that people are just tricked into believing spirits. Brain hiccup, it's an evolutionary hiccup because they're not real. We don't want to play that game, I'm just saying, or that academic game. But also one of the questions that's come out of this, spirits are not real, and we're being tricked into it, dubbed by our brains, is that how do we replace belief in spirits with rationality? So one of the call that early anthropologists and a lot of other people are like, you know, you really should be wise and get people to realize spirits aren't real and replace with rationality. So that also makes our book very different, because we are tabling all that and saying no. So we push it aside. But this is what Todd and I think are really important. We think these are more useful questions, and it opens a dialogue. Now, this is something that Felicitas Goodman, Michael Harner knew. Both Felicitas Goodman and Michael Harner said, and the Turners too. People worldwide talk about spirits. Shamans use the term spirits. We should use it too. Both Goodman and the Turners and again Harner said, this is so important that we should just go ahead and study in the terms that the people we live with and work with use. So anyway, so this is some of the questions we thought were useful for our own book. What types, what are the type of spirits? How are different spirits defined? And how are categories similar and different across cultures? And I really like this because this gets into the fun stuff, the drums, the rattles, all this, the regalia, all the important stuff. But what tools and methods do people use to interact with spirits? How do we get the neuro physiology going, like you talked about earlier, Laura? How do we get it going? And that is a really great question, we think. And part of it is the what we call in anthropology ritual tools to do that. You want to add anything, Todd?
No, and what Dr. Goodman did, I mean, she spent much of her career looking at the tools and methods that people could use to interact with spirits, and that's what the Cuyamungue Institute is so useful in terms of providing one pathway. It's not the only pathway. One of the things that is worthwhile keeping in mind is that we think about altered states of consciousness as a sort of a central pathway for interacting with spirits. Felicitas Goodman and Bourgnon and others have looked at the frequency of altered states of consciousness, these sorts of mystical experiences, and they're extremely common. They've been documented. At least 90% of cultures have these as part of religious practices. In our own culture, for example, Pentecostals are a case where there are altered states of consciousness and spiritual interactions, the speaking in tongues, those sorts of things. Even in cultures where you may not necessarily think about them being all that common, they're still used at least sometimes. Paul's encounter on the road to Damascus being an extreme example where
Saul Paul, not Paul Robert, but in the Bible.
We got that.
Me also.
He hasn't been to Damascus yet. Yeah.
But you know, these there's more to religious experiences than just altered states of consciousness. So there are people that will have religious experience when they're just sitting down and not having an altered state of consciousness at all. There are other cases, for example, the miracle of Fatima, where literally thousands of people had a religious experience, none of whom were in altered states of consciousness, at least that we're aware. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Paul playing the morning sunrise and the sun setting in Hawaii and having the chant going. Paul, I suspect, was not in altered states of consciousness, but that is a very important spiritual practice that is on that continuum. You don't have to be in altered states of consciousness to have and believe the power of the spirit and the sun and the power that is in the islands we call Hawaii. Very powerful things go on all around us in waking moments with our day-to-day life.
And it's also part of just maintaining right relationship with ourself, our community, our planet, our world, right? That's honoring the greater whole. Yeah.
Do you have any questions about this slide or any comments before we move on?
Nope.
Okay.
Go ahead and continue.
So this is coming out of when I first started my dissertation research. It is pretty clear, at least for many mediums and shamans, that spirits choose the person that will become a shaman. Often people don't really have much of a choice. Often people are like, no, I don't want to do this, because it is a task and they're very demanding, the spirits are. And in this case, this is from Casas Grandes, the pottery study from northern Mexico, the southern US, where this is a shaman who in their soul flight turn into a macaw-headed anthropomorph, dancing with the horn-plumed serpent and tutelary birds. Most likely the tutelary birds and the horned serpents probably said, hey, you're going to be a shaman, and you're going to help us. We think in Casas Grandes, you're going to help to make rain. You're going to make it pour. You're going to work with us to bring water. We'll show you how to do the ritual. So the spirits choose a person, and then they give the person the ritual knowledge that they need to do it. That's why the spirits often train people. Go, Todd.
So I want to bring up in terms of the choosing, expounding on what Dr. Chris was talking about, she's absolutely right that shamans often will actually try to avoid the call. And this is also true with priests, but you can just think about Jonah and the whale, that whole story about you've got a prophet there. God says, I want you to do this. Jonah says, no way, I'm out of here. And then the whole story of Jonah and the whale is literally God forcing Jonah to behave in a way that he wants. The same thing happens cross-culturally in the sense of a lot of times the people who are called by the spirits do not wish to be called because it comes with a life of hardship. It comes with a life of frequently intense pain. It's something that they are trying to avoid in many cases, but they can't because of illness or other misfortunes literally force them into having these sorts of relationships with the spirits. So it's worth keeping in mind that it isn't just simply that people say, hey, you know what would be great? I think I'll become a shaman today. Mm-hmm. Some cultures that might happen, but in a great many cultures, instead, it's an incredibly heavy burden that people would just as soon not have if they could get rid of. And they don't have a choice about becoming a shaman or a priest or any of the other sorts of mediums or the very sorts of religious practitioners that we see worldwide. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and then so the last thing that comes with this type of discussion that Todd and I are talking about is that the person will learn what needs to be done to have control. In the case of the Yanomamo, this is Napoleon Chagnon, famous anthropologist, but the shamans in the Yanomamo paint themselves to attract the beautiful spirits to help them do their practice. So spirits, the Hekrada, are attracted to beautiful men painted beautifully. And this is what's going on in this ritual. You want to read that section from her book? And this Goodman quotes this. So this is in 2 of Goodman's book. And we, like Goodman, love this quote from Napoleon Chagnon. Go ahead, Todd.
Well, what this does is this shows the relationship between humans and spirits. And so this is a case where there's a form of spirit possession. Now, this isn't like the exorcist form of spirit possession that is undesired and dangerous. Rather, this is a form of spirit possession that's very common worldwide. Fred Smith, for example, has said this in many cases. But this is Chagnon's recounting of his spirit possession. My arms seemed light and began moving almost of their own accord. Rhythmically, I'm sorry, let me start over again. My arms seemed light and began moving almost of their own accord, rhythmically up and down at my side. I called to Ferrerwil and Parabewil, hot and meat-hungry Hekara. The Hekara are the spirits that the Yanomamo have, and asked them to come into my chest and dwell within me. I felt great power and confidence, and I sang louder and louder, and pranced and danced in even more complex patterns. I took up arrows and manipulated them as I had seen shaman manipulate them, striking out magical blows, searching the horizon for Hekara, singing and singing and singing. Others joined me, and still others had the machetes and bows. For I now said, Rakurawa dwelt within my chest and directed my actions, and all knew that he caused men to be violent. We pranced together and communed with the spirits. And the point here is that there's this relationship among the Yanomamo and many other groups worldwide where the spirits and religious practitioners are partners. So it isn't that the spirits are just using the humans, or it's not just that the humans are using the spirits. Rather, they're partners, and humans give up a certain control over themselves at the behest of the spirits or for the spirits, while the spirits will also work with humans for their own purposes, for their own goals. And so this is not a case in which you have
symbiotic relationship.
Exactly.
Goodman would say that the spirits need us as much as we need the spirits, and they're not over us. They're brothers and sisters in an equal, co-equal, reciprocal relationship.
Exactly. There's this relationship among the spirits and humans such that we frequently are working together. Now, sometimes we can also be working at odds with each other. When I say we, it could be an individual human, or it could be humans in general. Yeah. But there are cases where it's an antagonistic relationship as well as a positive relationship. And both are extremely common worldwide.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. You know, it's interesting also you show riding on the back of a spirit animal, transforming into a hybrid form, a metamorphosis. painting, dancing, singing, celebrating. It's so interesting to me that all of these are parts of our spirit journey experiences, whether we sign up to be shamans or not. But Goodman would say that this practice came from a time when all of us had equal access to these realms. All of us are equipped and therefore have this right to engage with the spirits for our betterment. So you may
Yes.
specialize in this, but we all have equal access. This is all of our heritage, no matter who you are
Absolutely.
in life, whatever your role in life is.
Absolutely. And so in our book, Todd and I, again, pulling on spirits first, humans second, we present a somewhat new model for Upper Paleolithic shamanism. And one of the things that has puzzled some of our peers is how come these people that look really injured to us with all kinds of medical issues, what we would deem medical, and other stuff going on with them, we think that they were special and given special burials and rites because they were special people. They understood spirits, but they had that power and people acknowledged them as special because everybody in the society was having spiritual experiences. So it came out of the corpus of everyone. So we 100% agree with you and with Goodman. And that's part of our book. What we're pushing on is flipping that again, but acknowledging that everybody through their own DNA worldwide, through history, deep history, would have had these type of experiences. And you don't really even need to go and do a special ceremony necessarily to see aspects of this type of phenomenon.
You felt that these methods were given to us as we lost that connection through time, as civilization advanced and there were specialists. The priest saying, oh no, you can only get here through me, right? As opposed to your direct relationship, that we needed practices to amp it up. What's something that should be just that we should have naturally. Yeah. Interesting.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, Laura. There are cases, for example, where Aboriginal Australians, for example, many groups of Aboriginal Australians will have a set ceremony or a set practice in which over a course of a period of time they'll actually go and encounter the spirit world in an unusual or an atypical way. Not every single person necessarily is going to become a spirit specialist, but everybody has a spiritual encounter of some sort as part of this process. And that's extremely common worldwide, where you're expected to know something about the spirit world. You're expected to be knowledgeable about the spirits. It may not be what you do on a day-to-day basis, but you're expected to
you acknowledge, you have
them.
protocols, you have a society that supports that understands that helps you through that. Yeah. Tell us about your own.
I was going to say, we also just seem to recognize that in children, that they have this, they have access to this realm. It seems to dissipate over age as they get older, and Western culture has its influence and impact.
No, you can't do that.
Like,
that's wrong.
Yeah. Stop talking to your friend. Yeah. So,
you're invisible. Yeah.
But it's innate in our human physiology that it's there. It exists from birth, that we have this full spectrum of experience.
You know, it's also a phenomenon that seems to have our back, so that in our hour of greatest need, when our back is against the wall, we have no other choice but surrender and be open. Right. That's where we seem to find some of the most powerful engagements.
And maybe later, not to distract the conversation, but there's lots of stories about the person becoming a shaman goes through some kind of near-death traumatic thing in their lives that triggers, that changes, that has that impact where all of a sudden nothing else matters. I now have a new responsibility in life.
Tell us about your own encounters.
Oh, and they still got one more.
Yeah, I know. I think that's the next thing.
One of your great earlier questions, Laura, where you asked about the journey and how I got involved in this, or how we got involved in our path of getting to the book and the history behind it. Lots of different stories, but this is probably my most curious one, and powerful, that left me reeling and in surprise. So in 1993, I was working for an archaeological contract firm out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, but we were working northwest of Gallup, and the project I was working on was part of a land exchange for mining. So the archaeologists were going in there, getting what they could out of the site for report before it was destroyed through mining activities.
So you said unhappy spirits right there because of that.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Absolutely. So the was a wonderful project to be on. I was paired with a Zuni man, wonderful, really fun human being. We had the best time joking and laughing. It made hard digging a lot of fun. And it was the middle of the winter. It was going from October into December. And for those that do not know Northwest New Mexico, it snows there. It gets really cold. It gets very cold. Anyway, so we've been digging we also had like 6 Navajo excavators too. So we had, because it makes sense, working right next door to Navajo Nation, should have Navajo people. We had the Zuni man, and they were so much fun. We were doing some pranks and having a good time. We're also digging in very thin 5-centimeter levels to do what we call micro serration for pottery. Serration, not too important, but the ground was frozen solid. It had a lot of water in the clay. And this is in our book, and I'm not going to read our book. I'm just going to tell you the story, but I have the vignette in the book. But we were hitting Mother Earth with all our force, just plowing the ground, trying to bust it. But the frozen dirt would come up in 7-centimeter clunks, and they were frozen. So we were digging something called a kiva, a ceremonial chamber where rituals happen, going down into it. And we're pulling out the dirt, and there are little tiny fragments of bone starting to appear in the clunks of dirt. And they're small enough and they're a little bit porous. They're like, is this human or is this deer? Oh dear. And what we do in the morning is that we pick out the earth, and then we take a big bucket, put it up along a rim above us, and dump out the dirt and let it sit in the morning sun to help defrost the earth so we could get it through a screen. So we have a pile of dirt early one morning around the rim of the kiva. And I had to, this is before OSHA concerns, I had to stand on a big bucket and get myself hoisted up out of the kiva. I look up, and there's a small hill just to the west of where we're digging. And up and over this hill is coming a dust devil. The dust devil, I already knew this from in 1993, that the Navajo and the Apache people, I was raised near Mescalero, New Mexico. I knew that this was a Chindi. The human has a couple of souls, but one lingers behind after death and will look for people to join it in death, is how I was told as a young person by Apache friends. But this swirling dust devil, probably Chindi, is coming at us. And I realized my clipboard is back on the other side of the dirt piles. I yelled to my friend, hey, we got to get the clipboard, because that's what, as archaeologists, we get paid by how good our notes are and how fast we dig. I'm trying to get at it, but this tornado comes up, grabs my clipboard, picks it up, takes it, I don't know, 5-7 feet, and then pulls back, comes back, and then drops it about 2 feet away from where it had been sitting. I'm trying to get out of the hole. The dust devil swirls back, and then it comes back in, picks up the clipboard again, and takes it up higher, and then drops it a foot or so away from where it just been. My clipboard had a rubber band on it that was to hold everything together. It's one of these big clipboards with the notes that go inside in it. And it survived. This dust devil swirls back, and it comes back to the unit, the pit house, and it drops it again. And I'm like, whoosh, it is finally, it's holding up, and I'm finally out of the pit house after falling off the bucket, getting back on the bucket, finally getting up. And I am now, and you're not supposed to do this, never ever run into a Chindi, a dust devil, really not a good idea, but I'm trying to save my clipboard. I am now chasing it around the rim of the kiva, back behind the dirt piles. And that dust devil has twirled back. It twirls back in, grabs my clipboard. It takes it really high. I watch it. It goes up high. I don't know, maybe 20, 30 feet. It goes up there, and then it comes back down a few feet away on the other side of the rim, where I would have been, actually, if I'd just gone in and gone the different direction, I would have intercepted it, but I have gone the other way because the way it's doing it. But when it lands, it looks like a fist hits my Rubbermaid clipboard, and it bows. And when it bows, it finally pops that rubber band, pops the paperwork, and I watch my paperwork look like little tiny butterflies swirling up in the stratosphere, heading east toward Albuquerque, New Mexico. I had taken off layers of clothing. It was super cold that morning. It was November, super cold. I'm standing there stunned, in shock, don't know what to think. I'm just standing there, and I stand there for a while and then just realize, oh, I'm really cold. My jacket and my sweatshirt's down in the kiva where I've been digging. I look over at my partner and I feel so bad for him. He looks as white as a ghost. I mean, the idea of you've seen a ghost. He is pale, white, and not a good thing. I would never ask this now, but I was just stunned, didn't know what to say. I said, in all my non-brilliance, are you okay? He obviously wasn't okay. He looked at me and for a minute looked at me and said, I'm going to lunch. And it's like not even 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, okay, have a nice lunch. I never saw him again. In fact, all the Navajo excavators left too, and we never saw any of them again.
Right.
The next day, 2 days later, we get snowed out. It's snowing. The site shut down. I'm back in Albuquerque where I was living at the time with Todd. And I get a call from another firm saying, hey, do you want a job? It paid less money. I was like, yes, I will take the job. Thank you. I felt like I had been warned that this dust devil was like a child going back and forth, throwing a tantrum and taunting us and playing with that clipboard till it finally got what it wanted, my notes. And I was always curious what the bones were. So many years later, I'm at the Society for American Archaeology meeting, and the owner of the company is there. And I asked her about it. And it took her a minute to remember what I was talking about, which site. And I tell her the same story. She's like, well, that explains a lot. I'm like, that explains a lot. She goes, yeah, nobody would work for me. None of the Navajos would work for me. I had to give up my contract because the Navajos would not work with me. I'm like, I was thinking, of course they wouldn't work with them. That's really an animate being that came at us, that interacted with us, that
Gave you a
moving.
warning.
It was it had volition, it had purpose, it had a show, it had a personality. And I suspect that they went and found somebody to help them with that chindi, to do the rituals and the practices they need to clean themselves of the chindi, because it can cause ghost sickness. And I'm sure they went and got their own medicine people and had people saying prayers and doing everything they could to deal with that. But that's one of those, did that really just happen moments? And I'm like, yeah, the world doesn't work always as we think about it. And other anthropologists, well, the Turners you mentioned, it seems like a lot of anthropologists will sometimes just have something that happens to them. You're like, wow, we really need to take this idea of animate beings. A dust devil is not just wind. I mean, there's something more. And what got me was I was raised in New Mexico, lived there for my first 34, 35 years. And when you see dust devils like this, it's usually in the summertime when it's really blistering hot.
Not the
I mean,
winter.
yeah, you can get winds and tornadoes with that quick change in temperatures. But this day, the earth was super cold. The sky was super cold. There wasn't any variation in temperature. And man, why this thing came up like it did and did what it did, I don't know. But going back to what that was, it was a deer burial in the kiva, which was very unusual to begin with. So there was something different about that and unusual from an archaeological perspective. But that's what was in the bottom of that kiva, was a deer. And so,
Gonna ask. Yeah.
Anyway, at least I think it's good that it wasn't human. But yeah, so that's again, I personally know it's not normal, but as an archaeologist, I have no desire to excavate humans. That's really not my idea of a good time. In fact, I have colleagues that want to do that, and if they have permission from the tribes, they may do that, but it will not be me. But anyway, you want to add anything to that, Todd?
Yeah, I'd like to ask, what is the significance of a deer? What was the deer in the culture that made that so special? What happened to your notes? Did you ever recover your notes?
I faked it in the hotel that night, and that was horrible, trying to remember things and trying to piece together notes. We have
you had to redo them.
Bags of artifacts. So I was able to take the data off the bags. I took them home, or not home, but to the hotel. You're not really supposed to do that, but I took the bags with me so I could recreate all the numbers right. And so there was a way to kind of do the notes, but
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you think that
I-
that
I
was going to
can
be
answer your
turned
question.
over to a mining company and be destroyed? That was really the raft, or we're just reporting what happened.
Yeah, I just don't know enough to know. That's a question that unfortunately I don't have the cultural background to know. And even with all the great ethnographies I've read and talking to various people, I don't have an answer for you, Laura. I don't know why.
Do you think the Navajo would even come back and do ceremony at the site, or just for themselves, so that their ghosts?
I don't know. That's a question we would have to ask them.
Todd?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
But I think this is the power, right? That you have something so unusual happen to you, and so unusual, and affected the Zuni man and the Navajo males, that they left and they didn't come back, and that I knew something different was going on. I was impacted, and I dealt with that, and that it was so unusual and so unique activity experience happened, that even now, this was 1993, I still don't, even with all my knowledge and all my reading and all my talking to people and all the great people I've met in life, I still don't have an answer for you. And I've never seen those gentlemen again. I'd love to see them again. They probably have a better answer than I would have, but yeah.
A cultural answer. But I think there comes a moment to all of our lives where
Mhm.
we have to confront the limits of our own worldview, and we have to say either I'm crazy or society's crazy. And this doesn't even, like, I grew up thinking, not only do the adults, as a child, I was thinking this, not only do they not have the answers, they don't even have the right questions. So I agree with you. And I early on decided I'm not crazy. We need to just expand our worldview.
So often things like the chindi, are a powerful tree, or thunder, or a drum or a rattle. We in anthropology, based off of Irvin, the nickname was Pete Hallowell, who worked with the Ojibwa. The Ojibwa talk about this in Hallowell with other than human persons. And so instead of spirits or ghosts or something like that, other than human persons, and they matter. And we as humans, we can interact with these other than human persons and create new made other than human persons. And so Felicitas had some rattles in her publication. She calls one her auntie. She was rattling during a ceremony, and she saw it have aprons, and the aprons strings going, and the apron flying up as a jolly old auntie woman. And so her rattle became materialized as a other than human person that she would then call that. A lot worldwide, a lot of shamans that make drums. I mean, talking about shamans who are making drums for the purpose of having and talking and communicating with other than human persons. Often it is a shadow of the shaman, or part of the shaman. It is part of the soul of the shaman. So the Adalai drums, the Adalai region up into China, Siberia, Russia, up in that area. It is also the shaman's double the person of the shaman. And so these are very really powerful artifacts that should be treated reverently, and actually should be out buried instead of in a museum. But anyway, we're talking about these type of, most of us already know that shells have an animate quality, that it has to do with water, and smudging is normal. Todd.
So there are different ways that these other than human persons can kind of be manifested. We actually have this in our culture somewhat as well. So you'll hear, for example, carpenters talking about the wood and how they collaborate with the wood. The wood that they're working with is actually treated almost as if it had volition. They don't necessarily mean that it has a spirit, although sometimes people might talk about having a spirit, but they'll talk about the grain of the wood and how they have to work with the wood to get the wood to do what they want it to do. And some wood is good for this, but it's not going to be good for that. And the wood has its own personality. The same thing is true for other cultures around the world. And sometimes it can just simply be that there's a personality here that we have to work with. And so fire, for example, is frequently viewed as something that has a personality. And sometimes it can also have a spiritual essence. The more heavily humans rely on these sorts of things, the more likely they are to be perceived of as having a spiritual essence. And so somebody's favorite thing may have a spiritual essence in a way that perhaps other things like that don't have.
We
and so
develop a personal relationship with it.
Exactly. And that personal relationship can be perceived in different ways. But as an other than human person, it's seen as a partner in that relationship. There's some sort of a collaborative relationship. But as we see with kind of the way that Goodman was talking about her rattle, or certainly the way that various groups might approach their shamanic equipment, it's seen as a spiritual relationship, such that, for example, the drum might become a boat that carries the shaman through the cosmos.
Mhm.
And there can be these very strong relationships. There can also be these things like charms, which might protect you against the evil eye, or might be a good luck charm. It may not necessarily have, it may not have a conscience of its own, but it's still an active person in the sense that it provides protection, or it does something for you. So, for example, many groups in the North America and even down in South America will have these bundles of objects, these sacred bundles, where things will be put together. And those become living entities of themselves. They have to be cared for, they have to be maintained, they have to be taken care of. They have certain power, and you can't just simply, toss them in the back of a trunk and forget about them till you need them again. Instead, they have some level of spiritual potency, and they're not the sort of thing you can just leave lying around in your house. They're too powerful for that. Instead, they have to be cared for, properly maintained in certain ways.
Ritually fed, prayed to, talked to, and
Exactly.
given respect at certain times of the year. Mhm.
But the same is true for many mechanics who say, for example, I can't just throw my tools around, I got to take care of them. And they might even name certain aspects of their
Everybody names their
toolkit.
cars, right?
Exactly.
Their
I was thinking the
steeds,
same
their
thing.
mechanical steeds. So, or
Yeah.
just the rituals, right? The baseball players that go in and have rituals about going out on the field or standing at the plate, or the rock stars that all pray together before the concert or the game, the big game, right?
Yeah.
It helps with our coherency. It helps with getting into the zone, right?
I
So I
just
think it works both
constantly need to
ways.
remind ourselves of that interconnectedness of
Yeah.
all of life. That one thing that we continue to be profoundly impacted by is the latest imagery
Yeah.
coming from the James Webb Telescope, because they're finding the extension of what we see as our life to go to the furthest, most unbelievable boundaries, unboundedness, actually, that we're reaching out to whole new spectrums of what life is. So we have to constantly remind ourselves that everything around us is life. It's not independent of us, and we're not independent of that.
Laura, you mentioned baseball magic, and it is an
Yeah.
extremely well-studied anthropological phenomenon, and not just baseball.
Oh,
You
interesting.
look at, for example, my father was a vet. He served in both Vietnam and Korea. He was a sailor, but he made a deal with Neptune that if Neptune didn't let his fish eat my father wouldn't eat Neptune's fish. And I never grew up eating fish. I hardly even realized that people ate fish until I got away from my dad, because we just never ate it. It just wasn't something. It just wasn't food for us. Because of this deal that he had made. These sorts of magical
Interesting.
bargains, magical practices are extremely common. We chose just a couple here to look at. If you go to a grocery store, especially in the Southwest with the Southwestern sort of Catholic tradition, but even in anywhere, to my knowledge, everywhere I've been, you can find these little votive candles
Yeah.
dedicated to various saints and various purposes. Some really interesting anthropological study of Santa Muerte and her relationship with criminals, drug dealers, cartels, and whatnot. It's a new sort of a way to work in Catholicism into
With Aztec beliefs.
into areas where it normally wouldn't extend. For example, with the cartels and whatnot. Certainly the Eastern Orthodox and various the Catholic practices in terms of icons and whatnot. But even things like the rabbit's foot that I used to see when I was growing up in every grocery store or every gas station, where they had the knives. They also had the rabbit's foot. I haven't seen them for a while, so maybe they've gone out of vogue, but I bet you could still find them via eBay or whatever. Break a mirror, you get 7 years of bad luck.
Well, that's because it was thought the spirit, that was a portal to the spirit world, and you would release it, and it would have to really take that seriously. I mean, these are things we see worldwide that people are doing today, even in America, is going on, and not everyone agrees with this, but if we look at the data worldwide and look at those issues, these are the things that we're seeing as anthropologists, and these are what people are doing, seeing, and believing, and yeah.
Absolutely. So and a lot of times I think, especially when we talk about anthropology, we think about other folk, and it's like, let's talk about the Yanomamo, or let's talk about the folks in India or whatever. Here we're actually talking about us as well. We continue with these sorts of practices, even amongst those of us who might not necessarily think of us as particularly spiritual or particularly religious. Lots of people have got their lucky charms. That one thing that they use that brings them luck in certain circumstances, their favorite shirt or whatever it might be. And you mentioned baseball magic. These sorts of situations are just ripe with
We're not
magical
so different, are
practices.
we?
No, we're humans, and humans are humans.
Mm-hmm.
And how
Yeah.
it lives in our society, even so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, what else?
Ritual specialists matter too. So the people that acknowledge the various other than human persons, whatever you want to call them, spirits, gods, deities, or just the universe consciousness, whatever is driving humans. You have people that are chosen, people that choose to work with them and deal with them and interfaced. And so all societies have the specialists, and we can track that from the Upper Paleolithic to today. And so you just have people that are talented with doing these. Let's have a stage posture here. That's what we're looking at. One of these that anthropologists studied over 100 years ago.
What I find interesting today is that these specialists are not given as much credence today or respect. I mean, you have psychics, right? You have mediums, you have readers, diviners, and they're very fringe. They used to be at the core of society. The kings and the queens would consult them, the diviners, right? People would go to this.
In our modern world, a lot of times people who are overly religious, especially those who have some sort of direct experience with the divine, are sometimes considered kind of weird or fringe.
Yeah.
And so, if I go in, well, we can use Pentecostals, for example, where Pentecostals are frequently by the broader culture kind of seen as, talking in tongues. Well, that's not kind of typical. That's not normal. But when we look cross-culturally, it's actually extremely normal. That's quite typical. And there's nothing unusual about those sorts of practices.
And that was Felicitas Goodman's specialty. She worked in the Yucatan and worked on glossolalia, and she had a lot to say about that. And so that's one of her things, was looking at that and how that impacted the community and the importance of that. So absolutely. And that's what actually got me going on finding you guys, was because I was looking at Goodman's work on glossolalia when I was working on the book.
Yeah.
And not only the ritual specialists, but you have to have people in the church, especially women, according to Goodman. The women are able to do this, but you still need a person to help the community, help the person understand what's being said, how it's said. So again, if you're
Community-wide phenomenon.
if you're a Catholic, and Goodman was saying, that the priest would still was really important for understanding what the practitioners were saying, the masses, if you will, in that small community she studied. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're trying to take spirits as real in whatever way you want to define that or not define it, we're comfortable with that. But analytically, as real, what are they? And they have their own relationships, they have their own motives. So you have a spirit world, and we try to look as if we were in what we know about the spirit world, looking down into the world of the human. So flipped it on again on his head, but the spirit world overview. So we have these, and it gets really messy. I'm sorry, we couldn't do a really good diagram for the book, but we tried. But you have spirits that tend to reside in the upper world, and that may or may not be heaven, doesn't matter. But spirits that reside in the upper world, spirits that are around in the middle world, the here and now, what we consider middle world, and spirits of the lower world may not be hell. It could be very important. And so these are terms that we're not comfortable with that, but the lower world. So some of the ones that we see is, obviously in the middle world, we have nature spirits. So we have things like the Chindi that are known to be the spirits of ghosts. We have location spirits. So you have pillars that are known to be an ancestor. We see that in Africa. We see that in the American Southwest. You have creatures that have spirits, the bear, right? We often see with certain postures at Cuyamungue, the bear spirit. That bear spirit worldwide looks a lot of times to be associated with healing. There's something about that important of bear spirit as a helper and a healer. I mean, he or she, the spirits can also cause damage, and then you have to be healed by another bear when the bear causes the damage. But that's an example of a creature spirit. And then plants have their own spirits too. Go, Todd.
So if you're familiar with anthropology, the first part, so here we're looking at the spirit world overview. And if you go down, you see the upper world, the middle world, the lower world. If you're familiar with anthropology, or those who are familiar with anthropology, they'll probably recognize this as what is called the shamanic universe.
That's true.
And in fact, the shamanic universe is extremely common, even amongst groups that are not shamanic. And so Chris is mentioning heaven, this world, and hell. That follows the same general pattern. And in fact, when we look cross-culturally, most cultures have this basic structure, not every culture. So what we're creating here is a typical model. And the idea here is that we could take this typical model and we could look at any particular culture and say, it's different from this model in the following ways. So this is not meant to describe everywhere, all at once, at all times.
It's just
rather, this is intended, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a place, so like Todd was saying, so we can compare and contrast how this culture is similar and how this culture is different, how is similar, how is different. It's just kind of like a yardstick to measure, and that's what we do in anthropology.
And the idea there was that we could actually quantify and identify where there are differences and whatnot. So think of this as a typical sort of a thing. Typically, there's this upper world, middle world, and lower world. Typically, the upper world is associated with the sky, the heavens, the stars. Whereas heaven, it's up above us. Typically, the lower world is down below us. It's accessed through caves and whatnot. And allowing access throughout these worlds is what's called the axis mundi. That's, again, another very common anthropological term. So this is not reinventing the wheel. Rather, this incorporates a lot of the anthropological knowledge we have. The axis mundi is the world tree, or it's the method, the cosmic mountain. It's the thing that allows us to move between the spirits. It's the portal that allows us to move between the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world.
So you have the lower world, what we think of as Mother Earth, and a very sacred place. And then you have growth and fertility. Yeah, there's the plant kingdom, and Mother Earth governs that. But then you have malevolent spirits, and then demons and lords of the dead. I really think of the realm of the dead as a sacred space where you pass through for the land of the ancestors. So I don't understand your chart.
It can be, but it varies from culture to culture, place to place. In general, speaking in general, the lower world creatures are less likely to be benevolent towards humans than the upper world creatures.
That's not our experience at all, but
cross-culturally though.
Cross-culturally, so when you think about,
so you're saying a little cross-cultural experience,
and the ethnographies and what's written, and all the data points we have, that's the evidence. And yes, they can be helpful sometimes, but if you're having a relationship with a dwarf from the underworld, and that's their terms, not our terms, their terms, the dwarf, it can be a trickster, and it may just as soon cause some pain and mayhem as to help you. And I know people love fairies. Fairies seem really wonderful, but fairies in the old Grimm tales, they pull you underground, and they may not even let you come back, and they can really be pretty. I know it's not a comfortable thought, especially in this crowd, but the evidence of what people are saying that some of these spirits will do, they'll harm humans. And that's the other thing, that how do you have a fairy be helpful? How do you have an underworld creature like a dwarf be helpful? Well, you better get if you're in parts of North America or parts of Hawaii that have underworld creatures that can be kind of painful to humans, you got to give sacrifices. You got to give tobacco. You've got to give food. You got to give offering. If you want something that's not naturally helpful, you got to make a relationship, make it right, to make some type of negotiation so they'll be helpful, and then better yet, not cause harm. And so throughout Europe sometimes, and people really believe this, if you go through some forests at night, they're dangerous. The fairy's going to take you away or kill you. Or if you're going to cross a bridge, there are trolls underneath it. These are ancient thoughts. So the thought was, if you're going to go under the bridge, you've got to give some food. You got to give something helpful.
Coin to pass the river Styx.
Yes, to give back. Or bodies of water. Bodies of water are always dangerous. And so you might put a sword into the lake. You might talk to the lake spirit, make sure she's not going to drown you while you're fishing or sailing. Or King Neptune, you're going to make a pact with King Neptune to say, hey,
About being in
I
right
want to keep
relation.
you alive. And it's all about right relationship. But these are ones that can put a real hurt on people. I mean, from the ethnographies, from the stories that we see that probably are based in truth of human consciousness, how we think about things. Yes, Todd.
So this would be why Osiris is the Lord of the Dead and has so much myth and so much of the Egyptian funerary practices about the Book of the Dead, and look at all these prayers and look at all these rituals. So this is about clearing your passage to safely cross over through
A lot of times,
into the land of
absolutely.
the ancestors, I would assume. So this is a lot about mitigation or making the path, the journey safe. So
depending on the culture, the dead may be in the underworld, or they may be in the upper world, or in
right,
as
the
we were
Milky
talking about the
Way would be the
Chindig.
land of the ancestors. The ark, the boat, Osiris and
Absolutely.
Isis were traveling up in the sky, the constellations.
And
Right.
some,
I was just say, coming back to the Chindi, as Todd was talking, that is a ghost that is in this world, and it's malevolent. And
Mhm.
that's our term, malevolent, but it's malevolent in the sense that it wants to bring relatives into the dead with them, to travel with them. And that's what makes them, if you will, malevolent, because it wants to hurt the human. These are anthro terms, not everyday terms. Malevolent, when we say malevolent, is wanting to do more damage than good to the human. And that's what we mean. So again, when I was a kid growing up, my Apache friends would not let me run into dust devils. And I was told many times as a kid, that will make you sick. That's going to hurt you. Don't do it. Yeah, the Apache, as children, the children Apache, I mean, they had some very strong beliefs, and I totally believed them, but they would say, it's bad. It's going to hurt you. It's bad, and don't do it. I'm like, yeah, don't do it. But that's when we talk about that type of malevolent, that's what we're talking about.
So a lot of funerary practices are also quieting those spirits of the dead and placating them and honoring them and
launching into the right place. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kind of returning, Laura, back to something you said there about that's not your experience at all. One of the interesting things about the Cuyamungue and the practices that Goodman developed is how typically positive the experiences are. They're not universally positive, but they're typically positive. That is not that's not true for a great many spirit interactions. And Goodman, in fact, acknowledged this. She's got her book about What About Demons? And she did, in fact, research the negative aspect of spirits, the harmful aspect of spirits.
Mhm.
So it's worth.
When she set up Cuyamungue, I really think because she knew more about demonic possession than probably most people, anybody. She was an authority on demon possession. But
That's
one of
right,
the things that
yeah.
when she set up Cuyamungue, she went to extra caution, carefulness to create a ritual practice that would invoke good spirits and helpful spirits. So she was very, very cautious about that. But she was very mindful of what you might call the dark side, the negative side, the potentially damaging side of all this. And so I do want to honor Felicitas because she knew all this, and she created this practice in which you, Laura, are having a lot of positive experiences. And that's the brilliance of Goodman, really brilliant woman to really put this into practice and create one that we're most likely not going to be harmed in the practice. And that's a beautiful thing. But it's just a
Thank you for
unique
pointing that out,
practice.
yeah.
One of the interesting things, though, is as we looked at this cross-culturally, and we did a lot of work
Oh, yeah.
using what's called the human relations area files and a lot of cross-cultural data, we found in almost every culture cases where there are what we might call demons or inherently malevolent spirits that didn't like humans. Either could be a class of humans or all humans, but there were these spirits that had an inherent malevolency towards humans present in nearly all cultures we looked at. We could not find any spirits that were always beneficially predisposed towards humans. So you could think about, for example, ancestors that, for the most part, have beneficial relationships with humans, except for when those humans start doing things wrong, at which time the
Misbehaving.
ancestors can,
Smack you around.
and when the ancestors are mad, they're often the worst. I
Yes.
mean, when you've irritated the ancestors,
Oh.
truly bad
Bad
things
things,
can
yeah.
happen. And angels being another example, you know, the Christian idea of angels, they're typically kind of favorable right up until they destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, there are these cases where there are these typically beneficial creatures or spirits But when they become angry, that's when really bad things happen. So it's interesting to us that we could find cases where there are these inherently malevolent creatures, but we can't find, or it was not a typical cross-cultural pattern where there were inherently benevolent spiritual entities who only did good. They always had that kind of double-edged thing of, man, we're rooting for you right up until you've gone too far, at which time we become a punishing entity of some sort.
You think, I mean, I had a conversation with an insurance agent, and he was saying, and I was asking about how do you do your what, blah, blah, blah. And he was saying, it's interesting how there are some people that just have a dark cloud over their head and misfortune happens to them. And we just see that, and other people sail through and don't. I think, it's interesting. So I'm thinking, wow, whether you're acknowledging this phenomenon or not, you are probably engaging it on some level. And this can help to explain your life and how easy or not your path is, or the challenges that you face, or do you think that we engage this whether we openly acknowledge it or not? So it probably behooves you to understand this phenomenon, this realm, and take the necessary steps to maintain your right relationships around you on all energetic levels.
I agree with you, Laura, and I think that at some level there's stuff going around, most people that we don't realize, but that's again because I believe in spirits. The other thing that we have a chapter on near-death experiences, and I find those very fascinating. And people I think are very reliable, but some of the patterns with near-death experiences, the Darien experience, where somebody has a near-death experience, but gets information and sees somebody that they do not know who have deceased. And that's really interesting, because that's not mean, oh, I know mom's dead, I'm going to see mom when she comes. No, all of a sudden I see Todd, who I didn't think was dead. That's power, because I had no way of pre-knowing until I had my near death that all of a sudden he died something, across town, and thunder got him, and I die in a car accident or something wonky, right? But those type of mystical realities show that there's something at work. And so that's some of the evidence I find most persuasive. I mean, I love Cuyamungue. This feels very real, but there's something about people that without any pre-exposed knowledge have a near-death experience, and then see somebody that they do not know or just died and they didn't know died, has them visiting. That's really, in my opinion, powerful, which means there's something going on that we don't see. Todd was going to say something.
Well, Chris assigns in one of her classes, actually in a couple of her classes, an article that is a scientific study of these Darien experiences. It's interesting looking at the impact it has on our students, because you'll have some students who absolutely say, yes, this proves that there are spirits, where you'll have somebody who knows that their uncle died across the ocean and there's no way they could have known, and here this is a documented example of that. Then of course you'll have other folks who say, no, it doesn't work that way. This is one of those areas where Chris and I have a little bit of disagreement amongst ourselves, and I think that is because Christine is at her core, well, first of all, a nicer person than I am.
I don't know about that.
But she's also a natural born mystic, and I'm not. Whatever makes a person a mystic, that I don't have it, and I don't know what it is that makes a person mystic. But the sorts of mystical experiences that other people have or have reported, they're not part of my experience, and that probably means that there's some aspect of me that's keeping me from seeing what other people see around them in the world, and that's cool.
Maybe it just has to do with your destiny and your role in life as well.
Right. And so, in answer to your question, I would say that all of us can understand that there are attitudes that matter, and that if we approach the world with the right attitude, the right spirit, things will work out well for us. Exactly how that relates, well, I'll say this, and I guess this is where I was trying to go with that. You asked if everybody experiences this. I think that everybody experiences it in different ways. So for some people, I think the world is a magical place where there are lots of spirits that are moving around them. And I think that's true for every culture. Every culture has those individuals. I think there are also those individuals for whom the world is a less magical place, for good or ill, for those individuals. and where they probably are, they are not linked to the spirits in the same way that others are. So if you want to think about it, I suspect it's more of a bell-shaped curve, where you've got lots of people who have some spiritual experiences and have, certain relationships, and they can see it. And you got some people who are really in tune with it. These are the spiritual
My
specialists. and
question was
mystical
more
healers.
about, can we explain some aspects of our life this way, whether we know it or not? Does it behoove us to learn some of the protocols and mind our etiquette to do with these realms, to really kind of clean up our act, to be more conscious in establishing right relations?
That makes sense, yeah.
And I don't think of spirits moving around me. I think of a phenomenon. The nature of reality is showing up and I'm engaging it. It's like, I don't know how to explain it, a field more than spirit entities running around. It's a field that engages me, or something. I don't know. We don't,
Yeah.
It's not about an
it's
astral plane of entities and ghosts. It's more of a field that I'm engaging with that can manifest itself or be present in a multitudinal array of ways, right?
Yeah,
That
and
that's part of me. So there's
Yeah.
many concepts around this, but I guess I was just asking that, I guess whether we acknowledge it or not, we're engaged with something far larger than
What could be
our
more-
worldview allows. I guess that was my question. But
Yeah, and in our worldview, it's from whatever American culture is, which is a hodgepodge of lots of
Yeah.
things.
it's a
That
multiplex.
It's hard to answer. There are other groups, and again, these are people in different cultures. But one of the things I find fascinating is I have my students read a article by Julia Casaniti, who does Thailand beliefs. And one of the things that I find absolutely fabulous, and my students just makes their minds blow up to think about. In Taiwan, the thought is your energy can expand out. And so the Thai believe, some Thai, not all, I'm sure, but a living person can haunt another person, that your vibes, your energy can really impact another person. And so if whatever that is at work, spirit or not spirit, but the idea that we're impacting each other in things like a tree spirit or thunder or whatever is going on, that it probably behoove all of us to think that there's stuff going on that we don't see that impact us. So be utmost respectful. You don't have to believe in it, but there is some evidence that so many people worldwide
Pay attention to the
there's a lot-
subtle energy.
yeah, there's a lot
fields.
more stuff going on. My students really do like the energy idea of whatever spirit conscious is energy. And that's actually a definition that the Sura of India, according to Piers Visky, does, and other people, that spirits are energy. And so that's one of many definitions.
Spirits
We
are
also
the energetics.
Yeah, so
The
lots of
empaths that pick up everything around them, or those who know to have shields up, or the psychic vampires that suck, or
yeah, I have my
the-
students read that too. The vampiric
Yeah.
shamans of
welcome to the universal life force, and just give it out, right? So it's unlimited source. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Interesting. I think you had one more slide about you had upper, you had middle.
Did we finish the slides?
And then I know
We're-
there's a
I think we're
questions.
good.
Yeah, we can-
I thought it's
Yeah.
up to you guys, but I think that was a good stopping point, that
Yeah.
we had so much
Good.
discussion that I thought it was just time to turn it
You know
off.
what's so valuable is that you've made such a scope, a wide scope of the whole history of interactions with spirit is documented by all these different cultures. And what do you find is the common ground? What across the board are the common elements of
So
your
we actually
study?
identify some characteristics that appear to be either
Universal?
ubiquitous or nearly ubiquitous amongst all cultures. Ancestors always matter. There are ancestral spirits, whether you call them saints or whether you call them the ancestors, or whether they become part of the Kachina or whatever it might be.
Are the unknown forces that are out in the universe that have transcended from a name ancestor into a spirit or some type of thing out there too. And so those would range our consciousness out there. That's
So
one.
ancestors always matter.
They're impacting us at some level. Yeah.
Yes. And another thing is that there are the spirits are active in life in some way. And so I grew up reading Conan comics. I don't know if anybody else even remembers Conan, but he worshipped a god called Crom. But Crom didn't matter to, Crom didn't care about humans at all. Cool. And that's great for Conan. But the fact is that cross-culturally, spirits care about humans in the same way that humans care about spirits. And so there's a relationship such that presumably in various cultures, there are spirits that they don't care about humans at all, but in those cases, humans don't care about those spirits either. Humans have interactions with spirits, and it's a reciprocal interaction in the sense of the spirits want something from the humans, certain behaviors, certain sorts of actions, certain sorts of gifts, even as humans frequently want something from the spirits, whether it be fertility, good weather, or safety. These sorts of things. There's this sort of reciprocal.
Just our attention is a gift, right? Our attention animates and activates that realm just much as that can gift us. That's what I
Well,
find.
yeah, Paul, you look like
attention.
you're
Yeah.
thinking of something there.
Oh no, I was just acknowledging what you were saying, but I was thinking about how this entire conversation and the spectrum of what we're touching on. I mean, it's so important whether we want to assign a specific belief. And I think maybe that was the magic of Joseph Campbell in his research and doing The Power of Myth, was giving us permission to have these kinds of discussions, to be able to reach across and not have the baggage of having it to be a belief or not a belief, but just simply being able to discuss it.
Honor it
And-
in the mythologies.
Using mythology as the veil to be able to discuss all these different types of experiences and things. Because it's funny because when the Campbell thing happened, it exploded, and it was across everywhere. It was not New Age, it wasn't Old Age, it wasn't scaring away the strict religious belief. It was everybody was able to embrace the understanding that within the human experience is these elements that keep reflecting themselves in every culture around the world. And like that, with your work and your research and talking about the anthropological aspect of spirits, we're seeing that you can put different names on it, different elements to it, and different cultural overlays, but ultimately there's a connectedness to all of this, which reveals the story of humanity and the broader story of humanity in terms of being able to understand there's something so unique about the human experience that we are able to have this consciousness, the awareness, this ability to have this interconnectedness of experiences. And so that's where I feel like, for me, being a part of this institute keeps me motivated and it gives me the fuel for the fire. It keeps the thing going. Like, I want to continue to connect to that and understand it, because it's something that maybe not in my lifetime will scientists ever agree. Doesn't matter to me on one level, because I just know it's so real from my personal experience and from the experiences of others. And having the experiences of thousands, in this case, tens of thousands, looking back at the Institute's records of individuals doing this kind of work and seeing there's something so valid here that needs to continue. And, I'm not, I'll get
We
off
do
this.
it in an uneducated way, an innocent way, but we find the very same
Right.
attributes, phenomenon, elements across the board
And stepping
yeah.
down from my soapbox for a moment, but just knowing that those were the final words of Goodman in her final newsletter. She just said, where this work has brought me was so important to me in my lifetime, in that particular spectrum of my experience. This is only the beginning. I have no idea where this is going to go. And I can only, I'm so excited for you, the next generation, to interpret this work in new ways, to understand the power of this work and see where it goes. It's going to be one heck of a journey, and so I think that's sort of where we're at here. And I think
what you're saying is that we may have lost the cultural DNA to these realms with our society, but we have not lost the physiological DNA. And so it will be coming through again and again and again.
But there's a freedom to not having the cultural
understand.
There's a freedom to not having the cultural DNA. I'm not restricted by the particular set rules of being a specific cultural experience that controls the concept of spirits, that I can allow myself to have that direct experience and do my own interpretation and knowledge.
Some new journeys to be had.
That was
Yeah.
probably a lot more than you were asking for, Todd. But yeah, that I've been listening.
We've got some questions also to address, but okay,
Yeah.
so ancestors matter, spirits are active. What else in a quick bullet point?
Well, I'm gonna loop back to mythology, which kind of sounds like it might be against what Paul says, but it's not. It's with Paul, but it might sound like that. History matters. One of the things we said is that origin stories matter. And yes, we're wonderful in the United States today to be able to have the variety and learn about so many other things. But if you're looking at it as an anthropologist, origin stories, people's birth of their cosmos, the way they think about the world,
Yeah.
those really do matter. The myths matter.
If I could add to that just a little bit, a lot of times in most cultures, actually, the history of the world is the history of the spirits with humans tagging along, as opposed to a history of humans with the spirits tagging along. It's really the spirits that are driving the history of the world. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And the cosmologies.
Yeah, and so one of our second thing that we already talked about is that at least some objects contain spiritual power.
Can
that
be imbued
this
with it.
concept is placed in this framework of animism,
Including
endemic
us.
animism, but something like that.
Yeah.
Charms are almost every culture is a concept of charms, a lucky charm or a protective charm.
Right, that they imbue or relate to the energy of the universe or whatever they believe in. Obviously, because we're talking to the Cuyamungue Institute, but we see this with shamans and mediums and all kinds of people. The spirit world, or what we think of heuristically as a spirit world, can be accessed through ACS, especially dreams. We can do it through sound induction, entheogens, trance. There are lots of ways, but none of them are universal, but lots of ways to do that. Another one that we're talking about here that we were trying to hit on was spirits are involved in daily life and impact the world of the here and now. To answer your question earlier, Laura, yes, that's what we say in our book. We agree with you. These impacts can be managed to a certain extent, at least based on cross-cultural regularities on what we might call magic, meaning you're harnessing spirits or unknown forces and energy to elicit something good happening. That's our definition of magic. But then there are always powerful spirits. There's always a hierarchy. Most worldwide people have a hierarchy of what we might call gods or deities, something that's above things, and then it trickles down. So power is different and trickles down to the world of the here and now. And so then from that, we have what we call Mickey Mouse, and we actually say that on a page, Mickey Mouse regularities that are loose, but I don't want to talk about those right now, but those are basically our cross-cultural patterns. And then we have, again, Mickey Mouse regularities.
Let's go to some questions.
Oh, thank you so much.
I also want to defend neo-shamanism because I think that's just the continuation today. Right.
I think so. And I think
the neo practices, they're meant to be adapted for every era, meant to be explored in new ways.
But not exploited, but
explored, but not exploited.
Yeah, that's my.
Okay, thank you.
Got to be careful. This is an exploration.
Yeah, but that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But Sue's got her hand up for a long time.
Okay, Sue, I'm going to put you up.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you. This has been wonderful. I have a question about spirits because I have personal experience at night where I cannot fall asleep because I feel these spirits, a spirit around me or something. Scares me. I mean, I don't know if it's a bad spirit, but it definitely is annoying. That's the word I would use. Very annoying, and I don't know how to get in touch with it. I don't know what it wants. And you were saying something about offerings, and I don't know. So if it's ancestors, I had somebody once stay with me and say that, oh, there's your ancestors. There are 20 people in this room, and I'm like, oh my God, like, for my ancestry. And so I don't know if you have any comments or ideas for me around that, because it's really annoying. It's been happening for decades, and I'm not moving forward with it. So I don't know. Does that sound like a bad mad spirit or?
No, I was going to say, it sounds something that humans have been dealing with for a long time.
Yes.
Worldwide, there are all kinds of things that practitioners, I would love to tell my sister's story, a childhood story. I don't have time for that, but we had a friend who made her a charm out of metal rings and leather that's set by her bedpost, where he knew what he was doing to protect her from nightmares and bad spirits. I had a friend recently we were talking about how I sometimes have the exact same thing. And yeah, and so my friend's like, get some Chindi beads from Navajo Nation. And that's what these are. And they help ward off ghost and malevolent spirits. They're made in Navajo Nation, and they're juniper beads dried. So I made a necklace of it. And I thought, if I'm talking about Chindi today, I'm going to put on something to protect myself from Chindi today. So I take this very seriously. So I don't know, wherever you're at and where you live, Sue, I would look at your people in that region that know things about these spirits and figure out what needs to be done. You might need a sage, you might need a charm, you might need prayers, you might need a blessing, you might need somebody to help guide the spirits to the light afterwards. I don't know in your case because obviously I'm not there, but I know that worldwide this is a human common problem, is sleeping at night. I also, with me, I've gone to talking to my house. I know I'm going to be crazy, it's okay. But I really do believe that our house protects us. You know, make your bedroom a sacred space, say prayers, ask your house to protect you, ask your help to take care of you. I mean, these are things that we see worldwide people doing that. Even on Facebook the other day, I saw a post from a Wiccan saying, you really ought to thank your house on the way out the door. I'm like, I've been doing that for a while now. But these are worldwide beliefs. And so to answer your question, there are mechanisms and things that can be these other than human persons that can help protect you from other than human persons that are wanting to do something. So that's my thought right away. Does that make sense, Sue?
Yes. And what are those beads again? How do you spell that?
Oh,
you know-
I'll send it. I'll put it
in the chat room. I heard it
Thanks.
beautifully put, as someone
Thank you.
said, make your home welcoming to even the angels coming down for a visit, right? So
Absolutely.
and there are some
welcome, be prepared to welcome the angels. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm into prayer. I think prayer is always our best, most important, whoever you believe in. There's lots of good discussions by academics, but whatever your belief system is, pray. Prayer is highly effective. I'm a firm
We can
believer.
establish those personal relationships. Yeah, do so.
And there's another
Yeah.
element that some traditions talk about, even the direction your bed faces, where you sleep at night, and that can affect your dreams and your experience
Right.
as well. So
Mhm.
I won't
Create a
advise
protective
specific on that.
envelope and
all of those things. Hope that
So,
does help, Sue.
energetically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has helped. And the only other thing I want to ask is because I feel like they want to give some, if there is a message there for me, what is a way to get that message?
That's another good question. I would say prayer and gentle prayer and prayer for safety, but prayer and safety as you're trying to get the message, and just say, I love what Goodman did, thinking about it with the RBP, so ritual body postures. When we set up our ritual space and we're calling in the directions and we're calling for safety and protection, wisdom and guidance. I can hear Paul saying it around as he's saying it. But that type of thing of, if you have something you want to offer, I invite good, helpful spirits help me. And I think Goodman's right. I'm not a ritual practitioner at that level, but I would suggest that, ask respectfully, but also have whatever God, deity, spirits you believe in that you believe are good and going to help you, ask them to help you have that negotiation in the messages. That would be my advice. This is also great
there's
question
free
for a
will
shaman
here.
or a priest.
Yeah.
Yes, Laura.
There's a free will here. And so we need to open the door. We need to actively open that door and ask for help, call in response.
And maybe
And there are
Paul-
specialists too. Yeah.
Well, I want to add one more thing that's so important that Goodman does and Paul does beautifully. Close the damn door when you're done with the ritual. And I mean that reverently, because you don't want them lingering. You don't want them causing mayhem and mischief. So there's a specialist who works on things like spirit balls, Ouija boards and all that stuff. And some of the things that they say is you really need to close the door. Like you're saying, you can open it, but then you need to close it. And then
have an ending.
I would say
There's an
whatever you
etiquette,
do,
just like we would invite any elder to visit, we would also at the end of the visit, walk them to the door and thank them. Close the door.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's that element to it.
So I would
Yeah.
say that comes into play too, with whatever you do. Sue, make sure if you ask them for communication to talk to you, then thank them nicely for coming and then invite them to go home and so you can sleep.
And you can specifically ask
You can do it
for,
reverently and respectfully, yes.
exactly. And,
Yeah.
and specifically have the intention of, I ask those with the highest good, that those who come in the highest intentions and good to be a part of this experience. In other words, you can have some kind of relationship that I understand, especially from today's discussion, that there's a full spectrum of these kinds of things that are available to us. We want to make sure we're really
Call in
having
your
the
protective spirits.
protective, the
Mhm.
highest good elements of that.
Yes, the
experience.
I
highest
would
good.
suggest sit with an open book and a pen and then just take notes
And see what's there.
and honor what comes through
Yeah.
your thoughts or your mind, or just recording as a way of honoring as well,
Mhm,
documenting.
mhm.
You're good at
Mm.
documenting.
And especially if you think it's
Sure.
ancestral experiences that are happening,
Yeah.
giving a chance for that to be expressed. I mean, this is an old technique of automatic writing, of people having that ability to just see what that message is and trying to release it, to let it go, to leave it on the paper. And you can also
With
finish it,
transmitters, receivers. What do you want to transmit? What do you want to receive?
and then you can also do a releasing ceremony with fire, where you fold a piece of paper up
Exactly.
and you offer it up and you burn it and you release it and let it go. And so that does all play into it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Sue.
Thank you.
Yeah. And other questions and comments, you're
There was
welcome.
a nice comment in the chat room
Which one?
from Brian.
Okay, Todd.
He says, really celebrating the pioneering mindset that you both bring to this work. The framework you're exploring makes great intuitive sense, and I feel a resonance with the direction that you both are pursuing. So yeah, thank you. Your work is needed here today,
Yeah.
Chris and Todd, to ask these questions and to give respect to the very societies and cultures and cosmologies that you're studying. So I
Well-
appreciate the way your approach.
I was also going to invite Sister Margaret, who's had a lifetime of being able to integrate the traditional religious values into the idea of spirit and how it connects with the evolution and her own experience in life, because she's well spoken. Sister Margaret, can I ask you to speak as well?
Okay, I'm up here with my good friends Rachel and Mark, and they're the ones who introduced this to me
Oh,
Yeah.
very good.
To the
In-
Cuyamungue Institute and Felicitas
in
here.
the 90s. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Actually,
Oh, you-
Been
Laura,
wanting
maybe
to
you and
meet
I-
you both. Yeah, and say
well,
thank
you and
you.
I met in 1993 at an introductory workshop.
Ah,
You had
fabulous.
a radio show then, so yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
good.
what,
That's good to meet.
our show?
Yeah, he said he met us back in '93 in the introductory workshop. Yeah,
Yes.
good to see you.
Oh,
You haven't
Yeah.
changed a bit.
great.
Well, maybe I could say something to Todd about his wondering about the mystics.
Yeah.
And I think it has something to do with what Chris mentioned, the tempering down of the thinking.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
the mystics that I know are all scientists. And so, it was Gregor Mendel who in deep meditation saw a string of beads, and that gave him the whole idea of the gene theory. It was the organic chemist who was frustrated because his experiments didn't make sense. He was sitting by the fire. He stopped thinking and he saw the Ouroboros. And in a moment, he knew that the carbons formed an organic ring. And then there's Teilhard de Chardin. So I always connect mysticism with tampering down the thinking function. However, whatever process you can use.
I think you may
Opening
be
your band.
absolutely right. In our world where we're at here at Mizzou and just in general, a lot of people a lot of scientists have this idea that the mystical experiences are associated with lower intelligence compared to rationalism, which is associated with higher intelligence.
Which is bonkers.
When you actually
bonkers.
look at the data, that's not the case. As you just said, many scientists have had their biggest breakthroughs through some sort of mystical experience, serendipity, and whatnot. It isn't a question of intelligence at all, and I agree with you there. Mystics frequently are extremely intelligent, and I've known some folks who are not mystical who weren't very bright either. So it isn't just intelligence that's driving this. I've thought about this. One interesting thing. So Chris and I went to Ohio State University, and we were looking through Goodman's correspond in some of her letters and some of the documents. And she had an interesting discussion where she was wondering about why it is that women seem to respond so much better to her practices than men. Not to say that men do not, but on average, there seem to be higher levels of participation, higher levels of from her perspective, sort of
Yeah,
success
Goodman's
or
perspective, yes.
with women. And she was wondering what was causing that, because from her mind or from her perspective, she couldn't see whatever it was. It was something, it was an unanswered question for her. And I don't know if Paul and Laura have any insight into this, but there is something about the way that people approach the world. And I don't know what that is, because I've actually thought about it some. And I think you may be right. It may be that I'm overly analytical and I just simply won't allow myself to have it. Yeats, the poet Yeats one time talked about, there's another bright guy who's a mystic. But he talked about their magical experiences all around us if we'll just slow down long enough to actually look at them.
Yeah.
And you're right. Maybe I don't slow down long enough to actually find them or experience them or look at them. But I do know that the magical world that a great many people live in, that actually most people live in, is not the same world that I happen to live in. And I don't know why. So I'll think about what you just suggested, because you're probably right.
I disagree with Todd, because I know my husband a lot, and it's okay for us to disagree. But Todd prays, and he prays very deeply. He has his convictions, his belief. And I think sometimes, honestly, that God put a shield and a warrior in front of me to keep me from the bad spirits that sometimes come around and bother me. Yeah, I really feel like when he says a prayer, these things leave me alone when he gets engaged to say the prayer throughout our 31 years of marriage. So I think he's more in tune to a spirit world. He's just different, that God made him a shield. That's what I really fundamentally believe. So we went on a ghost tour not too long ago, and we're in a graveyard, and they have their FM things and all their toys and gizmos. And the guy's walking over to us, and all of a sudden the readings on these tools go completely down to zero. I said, oh, it's Todd. He's the anti-ghost magnet. He just wards them off. And I had to laugh, but I think we could show with all these different tools the ghost hunter used. There's something special about this man. And that's what makes us work so well together, that I have a safe harbor with him, that I can sleep at night so I'm not pestered. So maybe, Sue, what you need is to find a spirit warrior that can protect you. It's
Good advice. I love that.
Oh my God, I'm looking. I am really looking.
Fabulous.
Right, Todd.
Write
Oh,
it
that's
out,
good.
all these qualities that you're looking for, put it under your pillow and send it out to the universe. Yeah.
And one of the elements that, Todd, the way
Yeah.
that Christine is defining you and seeing yourself is a male that can protect and stand in the sacred masculine. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
that it's a religion. It doesn't mean a belief system. It doesn't mean you have to walk around and try to become a shaman. It just means you're a man that stands with integrity, that you stand with a mission for protecting your family and protecting your community and the people around you. And that can reflect, as an educator, that would reflect knowledge in a way without the burden of trying to redirect and control, but just simply be there to put knowledge on the table. So all of those elements of the sacred masculine are reflected in your life. And that's more important
Absolutely.
than being
And he's
attached
gentle.
to a specific idea that
That's
I'm
a
a spiritual
spiritual
person.
quest in and of itself.
Yeah.
I appreciate y'all saying these kind of things, and I don't think I deserve very many of them. What I do find interesting,
I
though,
trust Christine, and what she says goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what I
Sister
do find
Margaret?
interesting, though, is when you look cross-culturally, a lot of times professional shaman are males. And so in some societies, it may actually only be limited to males. In other societies,
It's
it may be
too.
open as well. But it is interesting that when you look cross-culturally, spiritual specialists, especially shamans, but they're not exclusively males, but disproportionately, I don't know very many societies where males are never the shaman, and there are societies in which shaman are exclusively males. But it's interesting because things like spirit possession or things like mediums tend to be females. And so cross-culturally, there's a gendered component to the relationships between spirits. There's a gendered component to the relationship between humans and spirits, such that humans, males and females, tend to interact with spirits in general, cross-culturally in different ways. That's not predictive perfectly, but it is a pattern that seems to be repeated frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Sister Margaret, do you consider you're a religious specialist?
She's a religious
And-
specialist, but she's also a scientist. She's got all these different hats that she wears.
Thank you for pointing that out. And also, you're a mystic as well. So, just for the record, I know that there's somebody in our community right here that has had the question. It's the perfect time for you to answer this. As a nun of the Order of Saint Joseph of Carondelet, you've had talks with us about this. But could you explain? Here you do this work of ritual body postures, and you're a practicing Catholic nun, and you see no division between them. And you're a scientist. Could you speak about how you integrate all those aspects in your life and your work? I just want to get it on record. Yeah.
I don't see any conflict. And it goes back partly to what I said before. You know, during the 70s, I was on a road trip, a camping trip with a good friend, and we were at Canyon de Chelly.
Mm.
And I remember the Navajo commentator guide. He was talking about a healing ceremony that he did for his son, a Navajo healing ceremony, because all the Western medicine had failed. And at the end, one of the women in our group said, "I thought you said you were a Catholic." And he said, "Yes." And he was silent for a long time. And then he smiled and he said, "Madam, you know, I'm very blessed because I have more than one way of connecting with the Great Spirit." And at that moment, I began to think, how are some alternative ways to connect with the Great Spirit? And so as a kid, I think I connected to the Great Spirit kind of naturally. So I began thinking about that. And again, it was lying on my back, you know, looking up at the clouds. And again, I think it had nothing to do with thinking, but images would come just naturally. And then the use of the imagination. You know, so many times people in my group say, "Oh, it's just imagination." Well, great. You know, we've killed the imagination in most children. So yeah, maybe part of Cuyamungue method is waking up the imagination. Who knows?
Beautiful.
Anyway, I kept thinking about that idea of many pathways. And then when I entered the religious community, I learned about Ignatian meditation. And it's exactly the same as the Cuyamungue method, except you use a biblical scene. The only difference is in the Cuyamungue, you don't create the scene, you just wait for what comes. But my experience was the first time in the Kiva with Felicitas was exactly the same as my experience with the Ignatian spirituality. So I don't see any conflict. I just am so sad that Christianity went off the track so badly when they adopted Cartesian dualism and the patriarchal structure of Roman Empire. So if we could just let go of all that and stop thinking of faith as a belief system and think of faith as trust in something, which is what faith really is. I don't have faith in Mark because what I think. I have faith in Mark because he's a good friend and he'll be there, you know. So if we could just get some of it a little bit, get rid of some of this stuff, I think people wouldn't have any problem with it all.
So well
I
said.
completely agree with the Cartesian thing, that not only the Catholics, but a whole host of all American Christianity is based in Cartesian thinking, I'm like, that's a wonky belief system that's really cutting us off. Anyway, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I love how you said that, Margaret. That
Well
was-
said, Sister Margaret. Well said.
And Mark?
Wanted to
Well,
say-
if I could add something, the work of Walter Wink, a Protestant theologian, he argues our institutions have spiritual cores.
Yeah.
And to quote St. Paul, the authors of our current darkness are heavenly evil spirits in heavenly places. He does a really good job unmasking what he calls the powers. And he gives a lot of insight and assessment of our current situation relative to the powers that manipulate and run our society at the spiritual core of our institutions, which as materialists we always overlook and don't understand. And they operate better when we don't understand that. And I do recommend the work of Walter Wink on this account and his work against the domination system.
Yeah,
Is
I
he
really
still
do.
living?
So-
I don't know this person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How did you discover the work of Felicitas Goodman, Mark? What was
Well,
your-
oh my gosh. I love it when people know what they're doing. And Dr. Goodman absolutely knew what she was doing. So, and I couldn't believe people would argue with her. It's like, you know, she was like a laser beam. I think for postmodernists, a guy named Bruno Latour, in his last book, he's dead now, but he argued we should attach ourselves to the soil we live on.
Mhm.
And
Thank you.
he also described a new model of politics, which I like. It's now between the offshoring to outer space and terrestrial politics. And Dr. Goodman said the spirits all live in the soil. And that was one of the last things she said to me. So I just want to pass that on.
Yeah.
Beautifully, Mark. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Let's have a conversation sometime,
Yeah,
Mark.
let's
Okay.
hear more.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
get
appreciate
contact
that.
information. Wonderful to see you both. And
Yeah.
great comments. And I know the
Thank
the
you.
question came up about why, and Felicitas asked the question in her writings, the attraction to women and versus men. And we
Mhm.
haven't done a head count today of how many men are sitting here in this conversation and how many women, but I can guarantee you that it's 3/4 women and maybe more, I'm sure. And why is that?
Magic is afoot and the goddess is alive. That's what I say. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I can't limit it to any one thing. It's a question that I ask, and and here I am playing a role in this institute without any kind of pretense that anybody can step up and have any impact like Goodman. But we can at least hold the door open for the feminine, and I'm here to learn. I'm not here to direct. So the idea is that the feminine is all around us, and maybe some of us are opening ourselves, but I do see, like, I don't want to go off onto this too long, but I'll just mention that because of what I saw, I wanted to have men's gatherings independent of the women's gatherings back in the day before we didn't talk about gender being so fluid, and we just knew men were men and women were men, and so let's have a men's workshop. And so we did what we called a men's conclave. And I did that like 4 times in before the year 2020. And men, I think, have a difficult time lowering their shields and being able to admit they don't know something, being able to lower the shield and being vulnerable, because we're taught in Western culture, somehow we don't want to let people know how weak we are on the inside. We don't want to show that vulnerability. And I think that's part of it, because when we do all men together, that all of a sudden we can lower our shields and just be honest and share. And there's a power and an intimacy. And this isn't the men's movement from the 1980s where we're all sitting around naked drumming a drum. We're having the experience just of communion and safety by using the practice of ritual postures to open a doorway. So I don't have an
deep
answer.
conversation.
And deep,
Yeah.
profound, and I think it has to do just with the fact that we've been brought up in a culture that kind of men are supposed to not show how much they don't know. And so it's good to say, I don't know anything and I'm here to learn. And one of the most powerful parts of that I'll just really mention is that when we have gay men come to these workshops, that's when it opens the door, because there's a vulnerability, and gay men bring such a sensitivity to masculinity. They open a doorway that those of us in
Ah.
a traditional way are walking around and saying, what are you guys doing, man? Lower it down and let's see what you really feel here. And so that's my little comment on why men don't attend as much or don't seem to want to participate in something where they have to show that they don't know something. That's my 2 cents.
Well, then I'll add something too. But by the way, I wasn't allowed into these conclaves, but when they
No.
broke and I could, say goodbye to everybody, the bonding
Yeah.
between you guys, it was palpable. You could smell it.
Yeah.
It was just in the air.
Across
It was
windows.
such a different vibe to female bonding. And female bonding is like your most precious relationships, female to female, right? And female to male. And then male, they all have a different flavor. It's so interesting. And so does bonding with spirit bonding.
It's just
with
scarier
spirit
for men.
Just
I just
so
unmuted myself.
magic.
Oh no.
Thank you, Kelly. It's just so magical. And then there's a special bonding among those of us who've just had this experience. That has a different flavor as well. So it's just interesting. I also want to say before we go, raise your hand if you have any other comments. And Brian Tucker, I want to hear from you before we go. But
And Kelly just turned her mic on. So let's
okay. Let me just say one more thing.
Okay.
Goodman always said that we as a society and our culture, unlike previous cultures where they acknowledge this, we are all ecstasy deprived, that we are missing something so elemental and so juicy and so joyful and blissful in our culture today that we don't allow ourselves to go there, that we have restricted avenue and access to just sheer ecstasy, which is that touching of the hem of something beyond yourself in a joyful, celebratory bonding.
Okay.
Bonding.
Mhm.
So your comments on that, I want to go to Kelly. Brian, don't go without having something
Kelly,
to say.
comments?
Yeah.
Well, I think my main comment on what we were just speaking of is I sometimes just feel bad for men. Like I feel like a lot of men have grown up in this institution like mindset of like they can't be sad, like they can't show emotion, they can't feel too many things, and they can't talk about too many things. And I was blessed to have a grandfather that just talks about everything. He was in the Navy, and then he was a history teacher. So I mean, we could talk about anything, and he would cry.
Mhm.
But he was never less of a man for crying. Like I almost thought he was stronger because he knew how to do everything. He knew how to like cry and show his emotions and tell you that was okay. And then we had a great relationship, and he passed like 2 years ago. And that's the main thing I remember about him,
Beautiful.
that's why I thought he was strong, because
Yeah.
he knew how to, he was weak in front of me.
Yeah.
And that like taught me something like
Yeah.
of God. And
Mhm.
I'm kind of a walking contradiction as far as what I believe in, but I do know that I feel a lot of things, and I feel a lot of people's energy, and that I have something to do in this life. And I thank him for that, because he showed me how to be all the ways and that be okay.
Beautifully said.
Nicely
Thank
said.
you, Kelly.
Thank you.
I'm gonna
Thank you. This has been wonderful, Chris and Todd. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing
absolutely.
about
I think that's
Grandpa.
one thing that about letting our hair down and talking about our spirits allows us to talk from a soul level
Yeah.
and talk on those realms of the true interaction one to one, not just in our heads, but through our hearts, through our souls, through our being.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this discussion has ended up here, where we can just let our hair down and talk amongst ourselves in this way.
Let's add Brian.
I like the hair joke. Thank you very much.
My best description, it wasn't a joke. My best description is, for me to truly be with spirit is like letting the winds of the universe blow through my hair. That's what it feels like. It feels like you're just there, and the whole universe is engaging you in every fiber of your being, that you're just wide open and you're expanded to that state, to that field, that you're one with it.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. So that's ecstasy, or just the beginning of a glimpse of it, right?
Yep.
So that's what I think the spirits bring to us, is to be fully human. That's what Goodman would say.
Let's bring Brian
So,
into the conversation.
I'm just going to quickly say, I really enjoyed the conversation and the work, Chris and Todd, that you're doing. It feels so much a part of the spirit of this community. Like you're bringing back the spirit to this community. And it's
In
exciting.
an academic way. Yeah.
Congratulations on the publication of this book.
Thank you.
And we all look, maybe I can say this for all of us, we all look forward to interacting with that material. It presents a lot of helpful frameworks. I love the way you turned the thinking upside down and considering it from the point of view of the spirit. I just see a lot of good things ahead for this. So thank you. It was great, great presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Yeah.
that.
I will mention that.
I would say we've only just scratched the surface. So there's a lot more that you can delve into and jumpstart conversations. So come back multiple times on this work. You have so much more to share.
Exactly.
And it takes time to unpack it all, right?
If I could also add just a very quick word of warning. The press unfortunately priced our book outrageously high at $170 a copy, and we're not getting a big royalty off of that. If you can, we'd love for you to read our book, but the public library, I'm sure, can get a hold of it, and there are other ways to get a hold of it as opposed to buying it, because as much as I like the book, I don't think it's worth $170.
How about the general reader version? Can you produce the general reader $20 paperback version?
We'll actually work on that, because we were horrified when the press put that. They're obviously pricing it for libraries.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, oh man, we don't want people.
But we could all ask our libraries to carry it, right?
yeah.
If they get enough requests, they'll carry it.
And even
then you
if
can
your
do
public
interlibrary loans.
Exactly. Your public library can get it for you one way or another. And so that would be my recommendation. Please, we would just assume that you didn't buy the book and instead got it from the library, because it's expensive
absolutely.
and cool.
And I suspect you're going to be, libraries can now do virtual book checkouts, and you can check out each chapter by chapter. So also suggest to the library that they can do the ebook and do that. It's available in ebook, although they will not give us a copy. I'm like, where's my ebook? But anyway, yeah. So I know it's available for libraries to buy as an ebook, chapter by chapter.
It's so important for us not only to know our history, but to know our cultural history in this way, to understand and benefit from all the knowledge of the previous societies that delved into these realms, that got to know these realms, that documented these realms, that gave us practices and understanding for these realms. So this is a huge piece of our human history that has gone left by the wayside, that you're helping to revive. This institute helps revive it through direct experience. You're helping revive it through the knowledge base of all of these cultures and the records they've left behind. So this is important stuff to know. And experience. And make amends to, and respect, and make relationships with.
So, I mean, I kind of already done my soapbox on earlier talking about the interconnectedness of what you're offering and how that really helps put things into perspective. So yeah, thank you both so much for the work you're doing and the openness in which you do it, and being here on a public stage, because you know that in the world of anthropology, there will be arrows. People will be shooting arrows at you for saying things and doing things that go beyond the status quo. And, you know, you guys are probably, I was going to say, you attract lightning, both physically and spiritually. Your house just got struck with lightning 2 days ago.
Weather gods allowed you to be here
Prior
with
to
us
this
at
presentation.
time today.
The thunder beings and the beings of lightning visited your home as well.
I just want to read your chapter headings really quickly.
Okay.
The science of the supernatural, souls, ancestors, ghosts, and spirits, worthy of a whole couple of hours. An observational classification of spirits. We just touched on that. Got to come back and talk more. Spirits in the world, spirits and their helpers, defense against the dark, right out of Harry Potter. Neurology, physiology, and mind-spirit interface. Modeling the ethnosemantics of spirits.
Right there.
Lots to talk about.
ACSs without.
Oh, ACS with and without entheogens. The brain beyond ASC, the brain, okay.
On and on.
So much.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Thank you. Now, one of your popular at Mizzou, like everybody wants to take your classes. You're the popular professors because you're teaching the juicy, interesting stuff, right? You're making it come alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That they probably just laugh at me. They probably like, go take her class, you'll hear something really crazy.
But it's what we're all experiencing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway,
Again, thank you both so much for what you do and what your participation. And I know that Felicitas would be quite proud and happy to see the anthropological community pick up her work and take it seriously, and watch it
and
go
build
forward
on that.
and build on
Build
it.
on that.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah,
anthropological study of spirits, you can request that from your local libraries.
Well, and I meant to say that I felt in many ways, and I was hoping that Felicitas was here. We had to step back into Felicitas and go one step forward. So I like to think we're going one step, but a half baby step, but a baby step from where Felicitas left off. We're trying to make that baby step going forward. So hopefully there'll be more baby steps with everybody in this community. Many of us have been on other Zoom calls where we're all working together. And so our next step is to work with the Cuyamungue Institute and make these little baby steps going forward a little bit at a time.
Oh no, we want to go strides.
Yeah.
Let's go the
You
distance.
can stride me off face plant if I take.
Just
too
don't
big of
trip
a
on the
step.
way. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you both for being who you are and being advisors to this institute and doing so much of this foundational work to help lay a path forward.
Okay. Blessings, good health, and take care. And yeah, prayers for all of our family and friends in Hawaii. Yes.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Blessings to all of
Blessings.
you. Aloha.